Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. I'm joined here today by James, and we are going to be devoting a little bit of time into answering some of your listener frequently asked questions. The last month or so we've been attending a number of events in person. We had the Venture Hunting Rut Ready event in Brisbane at their mega store in Springwood. We also recently returned from the Flow State Outdoors expedition or expo, which was at the Wodonga Racecourse and Expedition Centre, where we got to meet a heap of people face to face. It was an unreal couple of events, and just further, motivated us to keep going with this podcast. But we just, got to chat with a number of people, as well as have been getting inundated across the socials and email. So we figured it a perfect time to try and get back and answer a couple of questions in one place. Something that heading into the rut we thought might be able to help and assist some hunters with some questions being answered, as well as learning a few things ahead of what's set to be a pretty exciting time in the Australian bush. If you have any questions and want them answered on the podcast, please make sure that you send them in to info@twinelements.com.au. That's our email with the subject outline FAQ, or please send us a DM to any of our socials. We have the Twin Elements account, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors or James Doumtsis Outdoors, and we'll make sure that we get back to you there. And if we think it's going to help the greater community, then we'll try and touch base on the podcast here and get that out to the greater audience. Alrighty, so without further ado, we'll jump into the podcast.
There's a reason they say, get serious, get Hoyt. Ayden and I have always shot Hoyts, and that's because we're rough on gear. Our bows are constantly getting knocked and thrown around, but we know they will stand up to the test when the time comes. Hoyt has created the lightest, best performing carbon bows on the market. While some people change their bows like the season, I've had my old girl since 2019 and she's still performing flawlessly. If you're in the market for a new bow, get serious, get Hoyt. So the first question that we're going to tackle came in from Jake Duddy. Now, I just want to say we may get some of these names and Instagram handles wrong, so bear with us and sorry if we don't get it perfect. We've lived with getting Doumtsis wrong our whole lives, so you guys, you just got to have to suck it up. But the first question came in from Jake Duddy, and that is, any tips and pointers to finding pigs once the wet season does hit and moves the pigs off water? So we're assuming this is more of a sort of northern territory, North Queensland sort of question. So do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, again, with relevance to the wet season part of it, I'm thinking that's coinciding with like summer rainfall in those northern climates. Now, if it's the Northern Territory and there's increased water around, one thing you've got to be considerate of, which also goes for Queensland and that Gulf country, is with increased water, there's obviously increased territory of things like crocodiles, as well as, flooding and things. So obviously just got to be safe and hunting smart. But it is some really fun time to be hunting. You can often, I think when it comes to trying to target animals when they are more spread out, because there is more food and water available, part of it is just covering the miles, whether it's on foot or by car. Another way to sort of eliminate where animals might not be is by talking to the property owners. Generally, they're the ones that are either doing fence checks for flooding and things like that, or driving the roads, checking what the animals, like their domestic livestock, are doing and things like that. And they're going to be the ones that are encountering the wildlife and the feral animals that we're hunting. So they're probably two avenues to sort of just understanding where to have a bit of a general starting point. And then once you've got boots on the ground, I think just looking for like sign like fresh rooting up. Obviously, if there's a bit of water around, the ground's going to be a bit softer. And those pigs should be leaving plenty of sign. There are some instances where if there's so much green lush feed and grass around, they won't actually dig for roots and things like that. They'll literally just snip the tips off that green pasture as it's coming up, and that can actually make finding them even more difficult, because they're not leaving too much sign around. In saying that though, especially if it's in North Queensland or the Northern Territory, they should still be wallowing because it should still be quite warm and hot up there, as well as getting like a range of like ectoparasites, so like fleas, ticks, mites, all these sorts of things that will be hassling them, as well as biting insects like mozzies and midges and things. And sometimes they'll wallow just to prevent those insects from attaching.
I think, as obviously when we think after the wet, or most of the time I think during the wet, so like if it's depending on the access and stuff in the Northern Territory, like a lot of these places are going to flood and sort of become inaccessible, or a lot of the area and country is going to become inaccessible via vehicle. Like you're probably taking a chopper into some of these locations in the Cape and stuff like that, and North Queensland maybe a little bit more accessible. But I would mainly be focusing all my efforts around the food source. Like obviously there's going to be shelter everywhere. Water is going to be abundant. And so generally speaking for me, I'm going to be trying to target the swamps where they might be, rooting up in the water and stuff, and trying to get to like lily bulbs and that type of thing, where previously sort of it's almost become landlocked, where the ground dries up so much and becomes so hard that they can't actually root up the earth anymore because it's so dry. So a lot of that country becomes accessible again, and plants often shoot for the first time when the wet hits again. So for me personally, I'd probably be trying to hit the swamps, find where the pigs are going to be feeding. Like they're not going to be feeding unanimously across. Like some swamps won't even be touched. You'll look at it and you'll think it's perfect, and then you'll go to the next one's completely like rooted up, and that's because like the water level is at a perfect height for that area to be rooted up, and also whatever bulb or whatever they're chasing at the time is at the perfect sort of time in the season, I guess. And so for me, I would be trying to chase that food source, and it can change very quickly from like week to week. So that's where what Ayden was saying about like trying to cover country, hopefully there's enough vehicle access and you can cover a heap of country, doing some e-scouting beforehand if you haven't been to the place, or even if you've been there a fair few times, like trying to put some pins into some big swamps and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd be visiting, especially if you're chasing pigs. I mean, even buffalo and stuff, like they obviously spread out in the wet, but there's still going to be a few living around every swamp, like they're water buffalo. But yeah, with the pigs, you're going to be trying to hit the swamps and hit those main food sources, but you may have to cover a lot of country to find the one that they're really hammering and targeting at that time.
It can be quite hit and miss also, especially when they're moving through as that vegetation throughout the wet starts to increase and get a bit thicker. Pigs are really like typical. They do like to just feed and kind of move on the go. And especially if they're just doing that and eating grass on top and not rooting up at a particular spot, it can actually be quite difficult to hunt them, especially if they're like walking one day and then moving a couple of kilometres to the next, and they can cover quite a vast distance as well. So wet season hunting is definitely a lot more hard and difficult than the dry season when they're more reliant on water. It can just be a little bit more hit and miss, but it's definitely a good time if you can find the sign and find sort of where they're living and moving. Can be some good hunting as well. So best of luck with it, Jake. Our next question comes in from Mark Bass, and he said, how do you approach your hunting spots in the dark? How concerned are you about headlamps and noise while it's dark?
So with moving in the dark, I guess I try to, generally speaking, not use a headlamp personally, especially because I think like times during the rut, for example, if deer, like a headlamp, especially in mountainous terrain, is going to be quite visible. Like if you're making your way up a ridge, well, everything in that basin is going to be able to see your headlamp. And if then days after days after days, which obviously where most of the people that listening to this are probably going to be hunting quite intensely during the rut, like if they're seeing that headlamp every day, then there's a pretty high chance, well, I believe personally, like how many times do you need to be wearing a headlamp and then bump deer with it on or not on, or them smell you or whatever before they start making that correlation. So I try not to wear a headlamp really at all, even if it's like, unless it's like emergency, like or trying to trail something like that. That's just my personal beliefs. And so I just know, like hopefully you've scouted the blocks beforehand, and you've got routes and trails and stuff worked out before the rut even, or whatever, whenever you're hunting and stuff, like you've worked out some trails in the light that you can walk, that you're not going to like break your ankle or whatever. Like there's a fair few places now that have like cut-ins and stuff, or you might work out a really good game trail going up the side of a hill or something like that, so you can get up to wherever you need to be at first light. The other thing I try and do, just from like a tactic and hunting point of view, is like I try and move and get somewhere earlier, and be moving up a ridge like when it's actually like black sort of dark, if that makes sense. Like, because when you're, just say first light, just say at the moment, for example, first light I know is about 6:10 in the morning, and sun up is at like 6:35, where I'm living in Armidale. So I try and get to the place at like 5:20 and be moving up the mountain that I want to be up on between like 5:20 and 5:40, because I find between that like 5:50 and 6:10, even that first light period, like the light's starting to become that grey light where you still can't see because you've got no colour, and it's quite difficult. You can glass, but like every shadow looks like a pig or a deer or something like that. But at that time, they can see you very well, and especially if you're moving up a mountain and it's semi-open, stuff like that, things can see you very well. And so personally speaking, I try and be up there before that, even the first light period, and that's where you're like generally listening, especially during the rut. You might be listening to croaks or listening to roars, trying to pinpoint animals, because often as that first light starts coming through, reds will stop roaring, especially if there's more hunting pressure. So I personally don't really like using headlamps. I'd like to have all my routes that I know, like, and the property fairly familiarized before, when I'm hunting on them and stuff, so I don't need to use a headlamp and I can walk in where I need to. And then secondly, I actually try and move in. And this is something that's probably come with age, I think, too. Like, I feel like when we were probably a bit younger, we used to try and cut it a bit finer and stuff like that. And like, we'd probably run late more. Whereas like, I feel now, like I would rather wake up a whole hour earlier than be 3 minutes late, because I can't think of, even like up north with pigs and stuff, like how many times you'd be like, oh shit, like, and you try and cut it fine. And then you get to a swamp and you watch a boar walk off a swamp, or, you get somewhere and then, you hear one red roar or whatever, and then that's it. And then you're like, fuck, well, if I got there earlier, could he have been roaring more or whatever? Like, and I just think so many times now, like, I'd rather be half an hour earlier and just have to sit there in the dark, because, and normally it pays dividends, like especially on pigs and stuff. Like, I can't think how many times I've got to a swamp and you hear pigs squealing and there's a sow and heat as they're moving off into the thick stuff, or you hear a dingo howl that you didn't, like, it only howled once and it didn't howl after it got light, for example. It just gives you that heading and that direction. And same with like the reds and the elk and everything like that. Like, I find that the hunt's now starting way before first light, and I don't know if that's just a change in experience and stuff like that, but I'd rather be like an hour early than 2 minutes late. So I definitely avoid headlamps. And noise, it's not too bad. I'm not too concerned about snapping twigs and stuff like that, especially like when you're walking in the dark. But obviously, hopefully you've picked out a trail that's fairly easy, because if you're making a lot of noise, and generally there's a lot of brush and stuff, which there's just the risk that you're going to like trip over and break your bow or your camera or yourself. So have good trails. Don't use headlamps. Try and limit your noise, and try and pick a trail that it may be a bit longer or a bit more conspicuous, I guess, but you're not likely to bump into something. Like, you sort of want to walk up to the mountain and get up in the mountains or whatever without the risk of bumping stuff. So even if that's a slightly longer trail that's out of the way, then I'd rather take that one than take one that goes straight up the guts of where you're thinking the deer are going to be or the pigs are going to be, because then you may as well just not walk up somewhere and just wait until it gets light and then start hunting from there.
Yeah, I would sort of, I differ a little bit in the sense of I definitely will use a headlamp. There are so many different variations that you can use in terms of like low beam mode, red lights, all these different things. So rather than having it on full blown sort of spotlight mode and be flicking your head around up in the air, looking at where you're going, sometimes I'll use a torchlight, and you can barely see it, let alone the guy behind you. And I don't think a deer is going to see it down the gully. So these are just things that if it means you're going to actually access a place a little bit quieter, a little bit safer, a little bit speedier, then I'll definitely use a head torch. I'm not a massive, it's similar to with deer scent, and when people say, oh, do you put deodorant on in the morning? I think if they're going to smell you, they're going to smell you. I'm more worried about wind. So if I think the wind's blowing the complete opposite way, then I'll do a kilometre detour to get around the right way. Whereas I think for me, headlamps and things, like if a car drives past and makes a lot of noise, driving on a track right above where you want to hunt, I think that's a little bit different to if, you're doing a little bit of walking in a spot, especially like in thicker bush. I'd rather just be safe and know exactly where I'm traveling. To sort of complement this, I would actually suggest if you walk, up a ridge and you go, oh, this is actually a really good track that I'd like to take in the dark, I'd just get a tracking feature on your phone, for example, or your Garmin InReach or some sort of mapping software, and do a track. And then that way, even if you have to have your phone on really dim light in the morning, you can ideally step for step all the way and get through pretty quietly and quickly. That's a good strategy. I've even taken it to the point where I've taken secateurs when I was hunting for sambar deer, because there were certain game trails that would get me to the best spot on a ridge or the best spot on a gully. And on the hunt, like after a hunt, on the walk out, if I thought there were any branches that were just a bit noisy or a certain stick, I would go and break it or cut it. Same as on the game trail itself. If I had to, step over a few log piles or crunchy sections of debris and things like that, I would, while it was middle of the day and the animals were normally bedded elsewhere, I would go and, clean up that track a little bit just with my feet, or, move things and move it away off the trail. So there wasn't really noticeable for the deer, obviously, moving through the area, and it was pretty low impact, but it just makes your access in and out of these areas a little bit better, so that ideally, if you don't have to use a headlamp, you don't do it. But again, I'm not one that's too big on, if I have to use a headlamp to be safer, quieter and a bit quicker, then I'll definitely use it. But it is worth saying, as James was sort of discussing there, when doing these like first light sort of approaches, and you're setting yourself up for the day, it's the prime time, go the best way, not the easiest way. And there's definitely something to be said for that. Like if you have to do a 1 kilometer loop and get up 2 hours earlier to get to that spot, do it. Don't, be the one that's laid out of camp and then trudging up the best ridge at the worst time and, wreck your hunt for the day and then educate deer for the rest of the week. There's a lot to be said for that. So best of luck, Mark, with, you're hunting this rut and everything. You'll figure it out as in terms of what works for you. Hopefully there's a few tips in there that you can use, when approaching your hunting spots in the dark. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters with the mission to give Australian hunters the resource they deserve. Through community events, top quality gear, exclusive deals and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. It's a community. Check out their incredible mega store in Brisbane today, or head to their website to shop all things hunting and outdoors.
So the next question we're going to tackle is from Merman Spearfishing. So what is the best pre-rut attractant for fallow deer, a rattle or croak?
So this is a really good question. We've actually had it pop up a couple of times, and I believe we've answered it in question 5 of fallow rut tactics as well. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back. There's a whole heap of information on, specifically we broke the fallow deer rut into pre-rut, peak rut and post-rut. But specifically for pre-rut, we like to rattle to bring bucks into our location. We do sometimes use croaks. Like I use it a lot more in the early hours of the day, or if it's quiet during the early sort of morning, to try and just spark up a buck, even if it's to let him do 1 or 2 croaks in response and just give up his area on a surrounding hill face or something like that. Whereas what we find is that through rattling, and especially if we're sitting off a scrape, we're able to bring bucks into our location. The only thing when considering this is that, you have to be prepared for it to be a spiker all the way through to a really dominant mature buck. So there's no guarantee as to like the age class or anything like that, but it can be really effective for bringing bucks in surrounding locations to your specific location. And, we try and be, if we're bow hunting, 20 meters off that scrape and ready to, we've had the pre-ranged everything ready to shoot. Otherwise, if we're using a rifle or something like that, you can be a little bit further back, but you want to make sure in both circumstances that you have a clear shot towards that scrape where you anticipate that the buck that's coming into your rattle is going to end up. So thank you very much for your question, Merman Spearfishing. We appreciate you sending that through to us on Instagram. So the next question that we're going to tackle is sent in from Dan on Instagram. His handle is SimDantra. And he's asked, do you know any Australian stores that sell rattle bags?
So yeah, Venture Hunting and Outdoors, they stock a wide range of rattle bags. So they've got a couple of ones in there. The ones that Ayden and I are going to be using this year are the Phelps Smash and Clash rattle bags. We just really like the sound of them. And yeah, they've got some cool features. But yeah, there is a lot of different rattle bags. And like I said, Venture does stock a few. And then, yeah, I know personally, like I now probably rather a good set of rattle bags, just because I find them a bit easier to use than antlers in terms of like especially when you're calling by yourself, like where do you actually put them? Like the antlers or whatever, like you can have a string and have them wrapped around your neck, but they're just cause a bit more movement. Whereas I like just having the rattle bags I can just quickly chuck into my, like my bino harness and have my bino sort of sitting out and just find that a little bit easier to control sound and movement and stuff like that. So yeah, if you want to jump on and grab some rattle bags, just check out the Venture website. I'm sure they're going to have heaps, or go into either their Hamilton or Hamilton store in Victoria or their Springwood store in Brisbane.
Also, if anyone's watched our recent film series, Fallow Frenzy, on the YouTube channel, you would have seen that we were using these sort of locking mechanism rattle bags a couple of years ago. We've had a few people ask on YouTube what they were, and they're the Night and Hail rattle bags. They work like equally as well. It's just that we find the bag a lot more conspicuous as well. You've got one part rather than two parts, and that's simply why we've sort of transitioned to those. But Dan has also sent in a second question just following on from that, and he said, I know you can mimic them with your mouth, but are there any red hind or fallow doe callers out there?
So there's definitely, probably in that sense, electronic game callers would be probably my top recommendation. You can use like a diaphragm call or something like that. You can probably more mimic a fallow doe. Or maybe like a really high, probably more of a fawn call with a red deer. I don't think you can get the sort of nasaliness of like a hind with a diaphragm call. But yeah, you can definitely get like a good fawn call and fallow deer call with one. But I'd probably be saying either use your mouth or use an electronic game caller to replicate a red hind or a fallow doe. So this next question comes in from Jack Cullinan. So, g'day gents, I'm from a property near the Central Tablelands in New South Wales that's loaded with fallow. Sounds like a terrible problem. For years, all year round, I've observed the herd with a full mixed bag, mature bucks, young bucks, and all does of all stages of life feeding and coexisting. It's almost as if the bachelor mobs don't exist there and they're living together all year round. On my brother's property in southeast Queensland, stags rock up about 6 weeks in March and then they're nowhere to be seen. I guess to bachelor up as they should. I thought the deer pattern would be pretty consistent across all mobs. So just wondering if you know why the fallow at home don't seem to play by the same rules.
Yeah, so this question is a really good one, really interesting, just to see that sort of variance in different regions. I'm also a little bit curious. I think he says like fallow bucks and things in the first part of the question and then mentioned stags in southeast Queensland. So I'm just wondering if there's also like a fallow buck versus red deer sort of issue here, which you definitely will see a bit of variation. But what he's describing can be seen and described in both species for sure. I think to the second point, when he says like my brother's property in southeast Queensland with the stags in particular, I'm assuming he's talking about red deer there, and just knowing that red deer in general are much bigger animals. They've obviously got to put on a lot more antler during that velvet and growing period. They're going to require a lot more nutrients and minerals and all these types of things. So hence they're actually more equipped to leave their rutting grounds or where they've been roaring in March, April, and travel further distances throughout the winter to put on condition again over the summer and spring, going into next year's raw. So these are just some factors why I think, red stags could be a couple or tens of kilometres away from where they're eventually going to end up and rut back with the girls. But to answer your first part of the question as to why your block seems to have, a mixed bag and bucks with does all year round and things, it could simply be that it's just a really good ecosystem there where, pressure is potentially low and those big bucks aren't feeling threatened by, hunters, because obviously, when bucks finish rutting, the last thing they want to do is be around any other deer. They just want to go and eat and put on condition essentially. And they're going to do that typically in a nice quiet little spot where they don't have to move far to bed to then go back out to feed to bed, because again, antler and velvet is one of those really fast growing tissues that requires a lot of nutrients and feed coming in to obviously put on all that growth. So considering that, it could be a property where, the feed is actually really good. Could be a low density. I know you're saying there's a lot of deer there, but compared to like carrying capacity, which is a really interesting term when you think of like domestic animals and for example, like in a beef system, you might say that 1 acre of land supports 1 cow. So if you've got 500 acres and only 200 cows, then you've in theory got 300 spare, 300 acres there that, could have cows on it that don't. So the 200 cows that you have on that 500 acres should in theory have, great opportunity to put on a lot of condition, not be, trampling on feed, not be chewing it right down, all these other things. So all year round, as long as it's like an average, season, those cows should be putting on condition. And the same can be said for the deer in this instance. So even though you're saying that there, is quite good populations of the deer, hopefully if it's in a good region of New South Wales there and you've had good seasons of feed, the bucks in particular might not have to be travelling much to go and put on condition, and they might be very content staying on this particular property.
I've seen this all up the east coast from sort of Western Victoria to Eastern Victoria, and then up now to where I'm in Armidale and even like Southeast Queensland for the reds and stuff. Like it can vary from property to property quite a lot in terms of like I hear it all the time where there are places where red deer especially will just rock up to rut for 6 months of the year. You can put trail cameras out on dams all of the year, never see a red deer. Come the 10th of March, you see your first hind, they rut all the way through March, April, the end of April, they're leaving. And so same with fallow deer don't tend to move as much. They tend to have more of a home range. But yeah, it depends. I think Ayden's hit it perfectly in the sense of like, I think it comes down to hunting pressure, but also mainly nutrition. Because yeah, like I've got some properties now where the bucks piss off in New South Wales where the bucks like leave and they aren't there until the rut. And then I've got other ones where they, they're year all round there and they velvet there, and then they rut there and then, so on and so forth. So it really does just depend on the block and the property. I think that red deer do naturally sort of segregate themselves more, but I also think that they sometimes don't travel as far as we think they do, and they often just find those really secluded, these are the stags that is, they find these really secluded, gnarly, thick gullies and just sort of work out where the pressure is very low and their feed is very good, and they just sit there for months. Like once these big old mature stags, like once the pressure's like trying to find those non-pressured pockets once the rut's disappeared, and there's no girls to be bred, because even now, like talking to farmers, like that's all I do through work. Like there are places where they see stags all year round and they see hinds all year round. And like typically you'd think that the stags would leave, but it just depends on the nutrition, the hunting pressure. And these guys only hunt during the rut and then they leave them. Which is interesting because if I had stags on my properties all year round, I'd be hunting them all year round. But these guys just seem to hunt them during the rut, but they see stags all the time, and they're working, like they're just cattle farmers. So they're obviously out there every day, tending to the fences, tending to water, whatever they need to do. So it just depends, and like I'm sure there's a million other factors to answer that question regarding like why they would decide to leave or why they decide to stay with fallow and reds. But I think Ayden's nailed it where he says, yeah, nutrition's probably the biggest one. And then like hunting pressure is definitely going to be the second biggest factor.
I think also on this, not to harp on it too much, but there are factors with like quality of the feed as well. So I think what James said in a lot of these like southeastern places, there's a lot of like natural bushland and then, pasture improved places with, lush green protein rich clover and sort of natural forbs and grasses and things like that. And that's going to be, as long as the carrying capacity and population isn't too high, that should suffice for most of these deer because they can go and obviously browse and graze on, wherever they like. The fences and things that we have here for stock don't really contain them. Whereas it is worth saying that if a farmer 5 kilometres away puts an oat crop in, right at the end of the fallow deer rut, then it could be said that if there's bush surrounding that, like the fallow bucks, especially because they've got such a big, toll coming up in terms of growing their antlers, will travel 5 kilometres to go and feed on that oat crop, and a population of deer can smash an oat crop pretty quickly, as we find out from talking to property owners and things. So it really does depend on like neighbouring areas, food sources, all these sorts of things as to why a deer might be more likely to go. But again, you've sort of answered your own question a little bit. If they're happy to sort of coexist and they're happy on your property, there might not be any reason for these bucks to leave. Like it could be a bit of a sanctuary that you've got. So all the best for hunting this rut, and good luck to your brother up in southeastern Queensland as well. Originating in Texas, USA, Numa Outdoors has formulated a durable, breathable, quiet and comfortable camouflage lineup for all terrain, seasons and pursuits. You may have seen us across our socials running the new Renegade lineup in our recent Northern Territory adventures. That's because the Renegade lineup is perfect for early season, hot and humid conditions in the heat. We're pleased to announce that the Numa camouflage lineup is stocked exclusively by Venture Hunting and Outdoors here in Australia and available now. Head to their website to check out the whole range today. Our next question has come in from Luke Rosso. He says, I've just gained access to a new block. Where we live, we're all on small blocks, let's say 300 to 500 acres. The block I got access to has great numbers. However, I've been a bit reluctant to hunt it too much because I'm worried about pressuring the does too much. Is that a fair assumption, or do you think it wouldn't matter come time for the rut?
Great question, Luke. And, great to be considering pressure this early. We're in early March now, so leading up to the rut. I'm sort of facing a bit of this personally too, where I've gained a few new blocks around where I live leading up to the rut. And it's one of these, what do you do? And ideally what I was doing first was being fairly passive, to be honest, and just sort of sitting up on the mountain, trying not to put much scent on the ground, trying to just glass a lot and sort of work out naturally where the hinds are moving, where the does are moving. But more recently, I think as we get closer to the rut, especially because you sort of need to work out, like especially one of these blocks, like the wind is crap pretty much everywhere is what I've worked out, but you sort of need to work out where these deer like go to bed, where they're feeding, all that stuff, which you can work out from, just from glassing and stuff, depending on the hill, depending on the terrain and how hilly it is and stuff like that. But you sort of really, for me personally, like I almost want to know like the tree that red hind is going to go and bed under or whatever, or that doe is going to, the area the does are exactly going to bed, because there's normally probably going to be a scrape in that area. And like, I want to know that sooner rather than later so then I can potentially put a camera on it, for example. But in terms of like assessing pressure and stuff like that, I think with just the way that I personally hunt all the time, I try and be fairly minimalistic in terms of like, I don't want to be scaring game and whatnot like all the time. And so I think if something does, like, I think we underestimate just us walking around how many animals we're spooking that were 200 meters away. They got our scent that we never saw and just ran off and stuff like that. But I don't think it has sort of the implications that we think it does. Like, I think in the whitetail game, like, they harp up, like you can't do anything. You got to be super silent, blah, blah, blah. But I remember watching and listening to a couple of stuff from like Mark Canyon, who's like, you know, one of the gurus in whitetail and everything. And he said when they were doing like the back 40 for meat eater and stuff, like they were out there, you know, literally like plowing the ground, doing all this stuff, like on there all the time, filming, had heaps of people hunting and stuff like that. And he didn't even notice like a change in the deer behavior of whitetail, which, you know, they talk about being some of the like the spookiest. And these were the big bucks, not just like any whitetail. And so I think that carries through with the deer. Like I think, yes, they may, even if it's like a 300 to 500 acre block, like it may mean that they sort of move off, but they generally come back. Red deer may be a little bit more sort of like if you just keep pressuring them, they may be a bit more sort of spooky and stuff. But I think they'll, like from the most part, like there's a reason why they're there. And whether it be like good feed or, you know, good bedding or something like that, like there's a reason those deer are on that place. And so, yeah, I'd definitely be trying to cover it before the rut to work out like where the animals are bedding, what the wind does at certain times of the day in certain gully systems, how you can access certain gully systems, you know, quietly, where the good game trails are, where the best sign is, where scrapes are starting to pop up now as you listen to this podcast. And I would obviously be trying to do it in the most passive way possible, and not spooking game when you don't need to. Like I wouldn't just be walking blasé through the bush and stuff, like even when you're walking out. But I'd definitely be out there trying to put boots on the ground and learn the property as best as you could before the rut.
And I'll just touch on this a little bit. This isn't really attributed to your question either, Luke, but what I will sort of say is there's a certain point with as hunters that we've got to also meet the landowner or the property owner's requests as well, because you know, it could be a neighbouring property, for example, and if they want all the deer shot on that property and you're trying to manage the place next door because you've spoken to that property owner and he says, yeah, I actually kind of like the deer and I'm happy for us to sort of, you know, try and just take a couple of bucks off there every year and the deer don't really bother me that much. But if you go next door and that property owner says, yeah, every time you come here, I'd really love for you to shoot a doe or two. This is talking about fallow deer specifically, obviously. I think there is something to be said about meeting that property owner's needs, because as we've learnt, James and I, very quickly, especially with Chiddle deer up in North Queensland, if they stress that fact of we've got too many deer on the property, we could be, you know, stocking more livestock, which actually give us money, and you aren't meeting that requirement, they will get someone else in. Sometimes it's helicopters to do it through, you know, government incentives that are paying for it, or another hunter or spotlighter or roo shooter or whatever it may be, to come in and sort of undermine what you're trying to do, I guess. So we can all have these hunting ideals. And this, again, isn't actually specific to your question, but it's just to help with the greater audience. If you've got a property and the property owner saying, yeah, mate, the sambar deer in Victoria smashing my wife's roses down the driveway, and you're sitting there going, oh yeah, beauty, I'm going to just try and take a 27-inch stag or better. And there's 10 hinds walking up and down the driveway every evening as he comes back home from work. Like, he's pretty quickly going to say, mate, you're not doing a good enough job. I'm going to get someone in that can handle this situation. So we've got to take it as hunters into the point of, and it might not be that you want to do it, but if you've got a mate that goes, hey, I really want to get some sambar deer meat, I haven't got property access, can I come and you can shoot it and I'll pack it all out and, you know, feed my wife and kids back at home, then there's definitely like avenues for us to, you know, just keep farmers and landowners on side, because we struggle enough with public access at the moment. So obviously then just, you know, keeping property owners on side, and reducing the impacts of these feral animals can also be something to think about. But thank you very much for your question, Luke. We really appreciate it. And yeah, best of luck for the rut.
Jake Curran sent in, hey guys, what map apps do you use on your phones?
So this one's a pretty simple one here for us in Australia, one that we actually are getting this question a ton. I think we've obviously just mentioned Jacob as asking it here, but we've probably got it 10 to 15 times in messages recently. We both run what's called GPS Kit. It's a $15 app on the Apple App Store. It works on iPhones, definitely. I'm fairly sure it would work on Androids and stuff like that as well. And it's great here in Australia, particularly on flatland and stuff like that, just because as you sometimes get into these more hilly areas with more topographical folds, it can get a little bit harder to know your exact location on that map, you know, on the map, for example, when you're looking at the satellite view. But one of the benefits with this app is that it's very cheap. It's a one-off download. And then you can do like cache specific offline maps. So for example, I might be able to download 1 million acres roughly in the Northern Territory, which will cover my property, for example, that I can hunt in the Northern Territory. It's easy if you're hunting somewhere in Victoria and you have, 5G or something like that, because you can just keep it on as an online map and it'll be super, super accurate at a really, really high resolution. Otherwise, if you want to chuck your phone on airplane mode, I just pre-download all the sites. You can also go, as we've spoken about plenty on previous podcasts and in a lot of these face-to-face events that we've done recently, you can also like pre-download, put in a heap of drop pins on any water sources, anywhere that you like the look of, go there in person when you've, in the field, and add photos and take photos to it, say, yep, great, fresh rubs, blah, 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 nice scrape, old scrape, question mark, good water source, question mark, Samba Wallow, question mark, and have all these photos and drop pins and things corresponding to it, and just use that as a lot of intel. So hopefully that answers your question, Jacob. It is also probably worth saying that for anyone hoping to go over to the US, we love Onyx maps. There is a bit of a wrinkle when it comes to like downloading it here in Australia. It's really difficult. You've actually got to have a physical like US address and things like that, but you can have subscriptions here and run it off your desktop. It's just, there's a bit of a glitch, which we're trying to actually work with the Onyx people. But we'll hopefully have some more updates on that sort of problem and a resolution in the future. So the next question is from Dave Towner. He says, "G'day lads, I shot a cracker buck last year in a certain part of the block I hunt. He had around 6 to 8 does with him at the time. It's a real nice quiet area with access to feed, water and cover. He had a few scrapes in the tree line too. Now, do you think that this year there's a chance that there will be another buck take over his territory? It's a prime spot, so I'll be looking over it regardless, but in your experience, when a dominant buck has been taken, does another one move in?"
Firstly, congratulations, mate, on getting a cracker buck. It's what we all aspire to get, so good job on nailing that one. But I definitely think like there's a reason that best buck is in that spot, and that's generally because it has the highest doe density on that area or in that hill, and so that scrape is going to be in there on that bench or whatever for a reason, because he can project out. As we've said, fallow deer are very like chauvinistic. They like being seen, they like being heard, and so that buck is there to show himself to as many does as he possibly can. The biggest bucks fight for the best areas and the best sort of locations to show themselves off. And so if you've shot, and it's the same thing can be sort of said sometimes with pig beds too, like if you shoot a boar out of a bed, like it's commonly seen that another boar will go and take that bed. It's the same with bucks. Like if you shoot the best buck on the hill, often the next year or even in that rut or the same year, like another buck that's quite mature will move in and take that spot. And that's generally speaking because like they're there for a reason, and that's usually because there's a high density of does in that location compared to maybe other spots on the mountain or on the property. So hopefully you're sending through a message to us in a couple of weeks of you shooting another cracker buck on that scrape. But it would definitely be an area that you're going to check, and I'd expect that within probably 50 to 100 meters of where you shot your last buck, there'll be another good buck this year, hopefully, if you've got a good age structure coming through and good buck to doe density. So hopefully you're sending us a photo of another good buck this year. But great question, Dave.
Yeah, I'd agree completely with that. And just like there's this sort of thing, like a realised niche, I guess, in terms of like we've seen it a little bit up north with the chital deer, where a neighbouring property will shoot 2,500 deer, and then within 6 months that property is inhabited by deer again that have just flocked in from the neighbouring areas because the landscape and the ecosystem can support X amount of deer, and they will go and actively seek out that spot. So if you've got the does that are unaffected, unhindered, not pressured and stuff like that, I think the bucks will be flocking to that area, as James was sort of discussing there. It is just worth noting that there might be some slight environmental changes in terms of like it might be a bit drier or something like that, or the scrub might be a bit denser, which might mean that bucks move slightly higher or further around the ridge or something. But in a grand scheme of things, like it should be in a very similar area to last year. So yeah, good luck, mate. We hope to hear from your hunts and some success.
We all know when it comes to great tasting coffee in the outdoors, look no further than Dog and Gun Coffee. But the same great tasting coffee can also be enjoyed in their whole bean variety in the comfort of your own home. Rounded out with their incredible hog chocky, Dog and Gun has something for everyone. Use code TWIN10 at checkout for $10 off your first order. Discover your brew of choice today. The next one comes in on our YouTube channel from Michael Gumley Guitar. So he said, assuming it hasn't been addressed in the second half of the podcast, but where do you start looking for red deer, and do you have any idea where I can find red deer in Victoria?
So this one's a bit of a tricky one, just because we definitely don't try and blow up spots or blow up areas or anything like that. We try and keep things pretty unspecific here on the podcast, just because people are obviously working very hard for getting their areas and things like that they're hunting. I think it's pretty safe to say in this instance that, there are certain regions and places in Victoria that are known to have, traditional red deer herds, for example, like the Grampians, the Otways region and King Lake sort of area. They're massive areas with a lot of, dense bushland and even in the sense of the Grampians, big national parks and things. The Otways have got a lot of ranges, state parks, all these sort of things that act as a bit of a harbour for feral animals to obviously go into really thick bush and not be, hassled by humans. So I think there's no mistaking why those animals are there. But generally, as far as it comes to red deer in particular, or not even red deer, but deer in particular, typically deer are often held obviously in captivity for either venison or velvet or things like this, sometimes even hobby farms. And then throughout history here in Australia, they've been released either accidentally or through, purposeful release or escape or things like this. And then that obviously leads to them inhabiting and scattering, populations in those sort of areas. So there could be deer anywhere in Victoria. Again, I haven't lived here, for a long, long time, so I'm not particularly in the loop. As I said earlier, there's a few regions where they're sort of more known to be, but I would honestly, if you're really keen, just hit up Facebook groups, hit up, pubs, notice boards, anything like that. Often people say I shot a red deer here in southwest Victoria. Go and have a look on maps, where there's some bush, go and do some scouting. It's really is tricky, but one thing you are looking for with red deer is that they do like having enough scrub to be sort of concealed and hidden in that they can revert back to, particularly those older stags. As we've discussed earlier, they do need good food sources because they are quite large animals. And unlike sambar, where sambars generally tend to be pretty secretive and prefer a bit thicker bush, reds can be seen quite often if they're in low hunting pressure areas, on pretty open farm fringes and sort of paddocks and things like that. So yeah, it's a tricky one, Michael. All the best with your red deer hunting and stuff. It's just we don't want to blow up specific areas or anything like that for people that work really hard for their access and whatnot. But hopefully, there's a few tips from me there that you can sort of unpack for yourself. Thanks for listening anyway, mate. Alrighty, so our next question is from David O'Brien. He says, hey guys, I recently went on a hunt in the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales. This hunt took place in mid-Feb. I was successful in taking a fallow doe for meat, and when butchering her, noticed she was what I assumed to be quite heavily pregnant. Have you guys come across this before, and what can cause this? I assume too many females, but not too sure.
Pretty interesting finding there, especially in mid-Feb. That is quite late compared to when you'd think that does should be dropping sort of early December. So you're looking at, almost 2 months, 2.5 months later, where if we think most does are going to be bred in sort of April, early April, you're talking about almost like June really, or late June, July even. So yeah, for me personally, we touched a bit on this in episode 5 and all the factors that can affect doe cycling and that sort of the reproduction and endocrine with their balancing their hormones and everything like that, and photoperiod and day length and stuff. So if you haven't listened to that episode, David, episode 5, we did a massive deep dive on fallow deer, so make sure you've listened to that one. But to answer this one specifically, probably what I'd be thinking would be a couple of factors. So the first one, it could be a low buck to doe ratio, in the sense that there might be 1 to 10 bucks, and so the bucks just physically can't get around to does to, to breed them all. And so like if a doe might be on for 24 hours, if she doesn't happen to come across a buck that she wants to breed with in that 24 hours, then she misses that cycle. 21 days later, she's on again. So, all of a sudden that's pushing her back. And if the buck to doe ratio is really bad, well, it could easily be in June when she actually gets bred. Another factor that's probably more likely, what I'm thinking, is that you've maybe shot a doe that was sort of a yearling doe, or it could have been like her first fawn that she was going to have. So it would have been interesting to see if you actually checked to see if she had like much mammary development, and if you think she was like a more mature doe. Because what I think's probably happened, even if it was a mature doe, nutritionally, when the rut came around, she probably wasn't in the best condition, and she probably wasn't cycling. She could have even been a mature doe and just been moving later and later every year, for factors like what we talk about, where if a doe still has a fawn and she's still lactating, then that has a negative feedback loop, which then means that she's less likely to cycle during the rut until she's weaned that fawn. And so she could then naturally, like every year, get later and later by a cycle and move back, and all of a sudden she's being bred in June. But yeah, I think nutritionally, probably it's one of the biggest factors as well, in the sense of if she's a yearling doe and she didn't reach that prepubescent or prepubertal weight and start cycling, like she could have been getting the cues with the reduction of day length, but she just hadn't got big enough and hadn't sort of developed enough to then actually start cycling until later in the year, where, May, June rolled around, and then she got bred then. But yeah, like, I mean, it's not that she would have, like in humans, I'm assuming in humans too, you can probably have like longer and shorter gestation periods. We see it in cattle, so I'm assuming it can see it just cross-correlating it to deer, like where deer can have longer gestation lengths, but they're not going to have a 2-month longer gestation length. Like she's just been bred later. And so then it goes into like all those factors that we just talked about, like in nutrition, buck to doe ratios, which are going to be the main things that I'm going to be thinking about to why she should, or why she could have been bred later, but probably not a bad one to actually take out and actually eat, because I'm sure she's probably going to be in good condition now. But also it means that fawn would have been born later, which it will most likely, if it was a buck, it's most likely going to have poor antler development. If it's a doe, it probably is already 2 months behind its friends, which means it naturally becomes on the back foot in terms of nutrition, which means it will probably become a late doe. And so you've probably actually done wonders for your population in terms of improving that buck to doe ratio, but also improving the chance that more of the does are going to get bred during the peak rut period, which is going to improve your rutting. So good job, David. You've done a fantastic job there.
I think it is also worth saying that disease potentially could be a factor here. Obviously, not all pregnancies go really well, in the sense of sometimes they do carry fawns to term, but then they may get, a uterine infection or something like this. Something might go poorly, which takes, a couple months further. They may wean that fawn and everything like that, but then rather than be able to come back into season with a normal uterus in March, April, she may have just fully recovered and involuted her uterus come June, July when she got pregnant, and now she's 2 months later again. Even if she wasn't like a young doe, as James was sort of discussing earlier, she might be a mature doe. But we see it with cattle all the time, where sometimes they'll even have early embryonic loss. So she may have been bred accurately and fertilized by a buck of the right age class in March, April, and then for whatever reason, stress, something like that, a personal specific to this doe condition, may have potentially even lost a fawn, recycled again since losing it because she was in a good body condition score initially, and has reconceived, and now just late and out of cycle, which again you will get. I think most of us can attest here that you'll often get to May, June, July, and even though a lot of the mature bucks have gone off and they're doing their own things in bachelor mobs and getting ready to drop their antlers, there's always that cheeky little second-year head or third-year head hanging around the does for a little bit longer, just because they're like a bit none the wiser, and they will stay around just, sniffing and sort of sticking around that mob of does in case one does come back into season or is missed or anything like that. So that also could be a case. But as James said, it sounds like you've got some prime venison in the freezer, and best of luck for the upcoming rut. We're keen to see how you go.
So this next question comes in from Owen. So his Instagram handle is Bruxma Bowhunting NZ. Can you vocalize a red deer hind call on the podcast? I know what I use and what I've heard it multiple different ways, and I was wondering how you call. So do we both want to do it, or do you want to? Oh, I think in this case, I'm going to chuck in a fawn call segment that I recorded a couple of years ago in southeast Queensland. It's mainly just a fawn, and I've got it on my Instagram and stuff. But I think I might have even sent it to you, Owen, when you sent through this question. But I'll put it in this podcast for everyone to hear, and that's a fawn. I'll give some context to it. Its mother was sort of getting harassed and bred by the time by quite a handy stag. Lucky for him, I've been told by the property owner that I couldn't shoot him because they were trying to pass on his genetics to other does and other hinds in the area. But so her mum was calling back, which I don't know if you can actually pick up in the mic, but the fawn was quite distressed, and you'll hear the frequency of how often she's calling. You can actually sort of tell that she's a bit distressed. So I'll put that in there for you guys to listen to. But so I don't pinch my nose. I can't really do the fawn call because it's quite loud, quite high pitched. So I just mainly do a hind call, I guess. But that was a bit of a poor one. But so like you can do your nose where you. Hopefully I'm not blowing out the mics here, but and then same thing with calling in a red deer and stuff, and everything else. Like it's all about timing and frequency and stuff. Like the more you do it, obviously the more stressed you sound and how urgent it sounds. If you're doing it like once or twice every so often, it's more just like hinds talking to fawns and that type of thing. So it just depends on what sort of message you're trying to convey to the stag. Or like whether you're just saying like, yeah, there's some hinds over here talking and sort of chattering and stuff. It's pretty rare that you actually hear red deer calling, unlike elk and stuff like that, and especially like fallow does. So it's not something where I'd be sort of hind calling all the time at every stag, at every opportunity on the side of the hill and stuff like that. Not that you're probably going to do that anyway, but it's probably a bit more reserved with the red deer calls. Do you want to have a crack at doing one?
Yeah, I can give it a go. I just honestly, if you don't know what a red deer sounds like, I honestly think they sound like a young, immature crocodile a little bit. It's like quite a nasally sort of, a fallow doe is, for me, I say mew, as in MEW, and go meow, meow, meow. And you can do that as high pitch or as low as you like. Generally, if they're further away, I'll do a higher pitch, meow, 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 and do like more chirpiness sort of thing. And then the red deer, I almost say like, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but it's like, it's more nasally, and I kind of use my tongue a little bit on the roof of my mouth, and it's almost like I'm saying no, and like it's weird. I don't know how to describe it.
So I'll do my fallow deer call as well. So I say ming. So ming, 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 ming. And like, as we've spoken about in previous podcasts, like, especially I haven't heard as many red deer calls, but certainly with the fallow, like there is, I don't know, as long as you sound like a submarine, like ming, like I feel like you're not really, getting too far off with a ming or a mew or something like that. Because learning from Bulgaria, like there was a million different dialects of that version. So fallow deer are a bit more broad, but I think if you sound like a baby croc, and I'll put that audio clip up of the fawn, if you sound something like that or even a little bit more nasally, you're definitely going to be in the right track to calling in some big dirty reds this raw on. So hopefully that helps you out, mate. And best of luck in the future.
Born out of necessity, Day 6 designs and builds specialised equipment for hunters. Their arrows are bomb-proof and consistent. I'm currently running their 275 spine shafts. The split between the usual 250 and 300 spine shaft is perfect for the heavier broadhead that we run. Coming in at 11.8 grains per inch, this setup is perfect for all game here in Australia and beyond.
Next one comes in from Nick M. Burgess. So how to scout state forests for the rut.
This one's nearly a whole podcast topic for itself in general, to be honest, Nick. But we do appreciate you sending it in. So I'll try and touch on a few tactics that you'll have to sort of elaborate on just because we're due to time constraints. Probably can't get to it in enough detail, but this is something that we will discuss in a future episode because it sort of relates to not only state forests, but massive parcels of land or new properties in sort of more particularly like Queensland, the Northern Territory, where you could be hunting on 50,000 acres or 100,000 acres or 1,000,000 acres and things like this. And a lot of the time you might be driving from, quite a few hundred kilometres away to get up there, and you can't necessarily just do it every weekend. It might be a once or twice a year sort of affair. So you do want to do a lot of pre-scouting, which is the idea behind this question, especially if it's in like a state forest in New South Wales or something like that, and you've only got a very specific like balloted couple of dates or weekend or whatnot. Whereas if it's in Victoria and you can, hunt it for, as long as you like, then it's a little bit different. You might be able to do a bit more in-person scouting. But the biggest thing I would lean on here is, one, I would probably try and talk to other hunters, especially if you know that someone's gone and been successful in the rough area. I wouldn't ask them for their best tips or best gullies or, where their wallows are or their scrapes are or anything specific like that. I would just say like, hey mate, like, are there any particular regions where you think there are deer? Like it might be the north corner of the place, or don't even try down there. It just gets flogged by other hunters, or, things like that. Other hunters might be completely secretive, which is well within their right, but hopefully someone can give you, a bit of a tip or tactic. Another consideration I would suggest is probably similar to what I was saying there about the Northern Territory and what we were talking about earlier with the GPS kit, is jump on maps, jump on Google Earth, anything like that where you can get a satellite view, do a heap of pre-scouting. You want to be trying to look for water sources, checking topography. If you know that in the region, for example, you're hunting somewhere in, New South Wales, and you know that on private property that your mates hunt, they have all their bucks rutting at a certain elevation because of the soil type or the vegetation or whatever, and that's just generally where the deer like to be. And you can translocate that to your place, which might be a state forest that's only 30 kilometres away as the crow flies. It could be just a place to start where when you go and put boots on the ground, that's the elevation you're at come the rut, because that's where you're anticipating the bucks are going to be, smashing rubs and all these things and scrapes. And that's where, knowing the nearby areas and tendencies, I guess, of the species that you're hunting. So if you're hunting fallow deer during the rut, then I'd obviously be looking for a lot of rubs. If you can try and find where the does are going to be, that's going to give you, a helping hand. And then the last thing I'd say is just put feet on the ground if possible. If it's obviously like a balloted section where you can only hunt for the weekend, then it makes your learning curve and difficulty of achieving what you want to achieve a lot more difficult. But that's part of the allure of it, I guess, and the challenge to it, which would be a very exciting prospect. But if you can get there, repeatably and hunt it quite a bit, I'd be getting feet on the ground. Like, do this pre-scouting while you're at home and can't get there. But then I'd be putting feet on the ground and really just adding to your intel, taking heaps of photographs, using tracking maps and features. And because you might find, and I'd be trying to hunt, what I do a lot in new places is I'll hunt for the morning wherever I think is the best spot. I'll hunt with the wind in my face and do a massive walk, or sometimes not even walk a lot, but just till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I consider that like a normal morning hunt in a lot of instances, will be just after lunch. Put the animals to bed if I've seen animals, not blah, 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 blah. But then I'll try and take a different route back to the car. Even if the wind's on my back and I've got to do like a 10K loop to go out and check out some new spots, I'll do that just to say, oh shit, I actually should move my starting point for next time 3Ks in this direction because this gully is going to be better on first light. Whereas if you just walk in and then straight back out the exact same route, one, you're probably like scenting up that really good area that you try to identify and hunt on first light. But two, you're not really realizing any new ground that could be in the area. And that's where I think just, chucking a heap of drop pins on a map is going to help, because if you can go and do one big loop and then go and hit out a bit further and, walk back and check a few drop pins, say yes or no, whether it's good or not. It's just going to help you sort of put together these sort of state forests, because it is a totally different sort of type of hunting, I guess, compared to private.
Yeah, and you've nailed that there. And like you said, this could be a whole podcast series in itself, really. A couple of things that I'd probably add is with state forests, like often they're native bush. And so if you've got areas that sort of fringe areas that butt up against improved pasture, farmland and stuff like that, that's for me personally where I'd probably be starting, because, so much of what we've tried to highlight here, like everything's driven by nutrition, and those improved pastures are definitely going to be where, especially more so red deer, but even fallow deer are going to be hitting more than the native bushes and shrubs and stuff like that. But yeah, Ayden summarised it perfectly. First thing I'd be doing is talking to as many people that I know hunt public land as possible and checking as many forums, even if they're like deer habits don't really change. So like stuff that you find in Australian deer forum from 10 years ago is probably still relevant for that national park now. Like unless it's been chopper shot or burnt or something significant, or the deer are there for a reason. Like, some of these national parks might be 100,000 acres or more, and they're probably only in a couple of thousand acres. There might only be 5,000 acres of it, but they're there for a reason. So doing some e-scouting as well beforehand, and knowing if you've got previous knowledge of where you think deer normally like to hang, maybe checking out some 3D maps and Google Earth and stuff like that, figuring out the best walk. And then honestly, like what Ayden said, I would just be walking. It probably sounds a little bit bad in the sense that, because it's not your place, and it's interesting, reflecting on this sort of question, than one we had from Luke earlier, where he was like, I've just got access to 300 to 500 acres. Are you concerned about sort of scaring the deer and that type of thing? In compared to yours, and it probably sounds bad, it's like, okay, with this state forest hunt, you've only got a couple of days and it may actually be stuffing up the people that come in after you. But if it was me personally and I was trying to get an animal on the ground, I would be walking, and it's my first time in there or whatever, I would walk 15 to 20 Ks a day, which is definitely not my rut tactic on my normal blocks. And I would be trying to cover as much country as I possibly could, knowing that I'm potentially going to be scaring game, but try and find where that game is, because 90% of the game's got to be in 10% of the country. So you need to find those little pockets, and you're often going to be walking miles and miles and miles without even seeing a shit or a rub or anything like that. This is obviously deer specific. So I'd be trying to find the best areas by covering a lot of country, whether it be with your feet or glass. And I think Ayden said it perfectly too, where don't walk the same route in and same route out. You'd be better off walking down the massive gully so you can walk out the other gully, or walk up the gullies, the actual valley floor sort of thing of the system that you're in, if it's mountainous terrain, and try and cover as much country and learn as fast as you can, whether it be from talking to other hunters, e-scouting, or boots on the ground. You need to just accumulate as much information as you can, and hopefully you can get there, a couple of times, like we talk about before the rut, for example, but also just throughout the year if you're just trying to get meat or even big heads and stuff, and just try and learn as much about the property or the state forest in this example as you can.
I think also, not to harp on this too long, but to complement what James was saying there, and what I think of when I think of state forests, it's generally not pasture improved. There's no one managing the place. It's generally, parks or whatever is managing it, has sort of left it to be a natural bush block, which, as you see, some of these places get fire through it, and then 10 years later, it's just really, really thick, nasty native bush. And because places that have sheep or domestic cattle, they're always going to have some element of fringe. Very rarely is it just complete bush block. So when I think of state forests, I think of really thick bush, which makes it a lot harder, and again, less visibility, which means less glassing opportunities, which is why I think boots to the ground is probably my preferred approach in those instances. But if I'm proven wrong here and you can get to a spot and glass a heap of really nice country, then I would also do that. I would seek out, again, through topography, where a high ridge is, get up there, and if you can see a heap of country, especially if there is a bit of fringe, or watch deer coming off private onto the state forest and bedding in that thicker, nastier bush, then it's just an element of getting the wind right and doing a bit of a slow stalk through that country as well. So best of luck. And Nick, hopefully we'll touch on this in a future podcast episode when it comes to just scouting new properties and state forests in particular. But thanks for your contribution, mate, and best of luck with it all. Alrighty, our next question is from Dino10 10 Dino 10 on Instagram. Are you guys messing around with mechanical broadheads on game?
So we've always been fixed blade heads guys, just for the simplicity and the consistency. I do know, like, so Daryl Bolger, who's a very esteemed Australian hunter, like he's used Rage broadheads for years now, and shoots red deer front on with them. Reports, and I've spoken to him about it, has never had a problem. For me personally, as much as like, for example, Daryl, who's a fantastic hunter, has never had a problem. I've also heard of a lot of people that have had problems personally, where broadheads have like opened up on grass, or when you're taking them out of the quiver, they open up a little bit and then they like half get snagged in an animal and it doesn't penetrate properly. And you just hear so many little things where it's like, oh, only got 6 inches of peno. And it just leaves you wondering, like, is that because it hit bone, or is that, like, there's so much stuff where I think it just increases the risk of things going wrong. And so for us here at Twin Elements, we've always been a fixed blade or a 2-blade broadhead, fangirls, I guess, where we've always just used 2 blades. More recently, I've started using the Cayuga pilot cuts with the smaller bleeders. And that's just because, you get a way larger cutting area with very minimal increases in like the amount of poundage required to actually push that broadhead through, a fighting shield of a boar, or through hide, or, musculature or bone. And you get a massive, you get an extra, I think it's 3/4 of an inch of a cutting area with those bleeders. And so for me, I use them. Ayden uses the Zots, which is just a 2-blade broadhead, and has had brilliant success with them. But for us, we like the reliability of a good 2-blade broadhead. And for us, that's, using Cayuga broadheads has been like huge for us in terms of our hunting success. Like, I don't think we've lost an animal between us now in the last couple of years going to Cayugas, and they're just, they're brilliantly designed and made heads. But for us, we like a 2-blade broadhead. So that's what we're going to be shooting into the future. Atlas Wild helps to fuel your outdoor adventures. My personal favourite is the peached iced tea in the Rise, which is caffeinated and keeps you ultra focused while on the mountain. The electrolytes and B vitamins in there prevent muscle soreness and means that you can back it up on these extended hunts day after day. We've teamed up with Atlas Wild to get 10% off your next order by using code TWIN10. That is TWIN, 10 the number, to get 10% off your next order. So Finn sent in, "Hey lads, I'm having trouble with hitting animals further back than I'd like. I don't know if it's a mental thing, but I always seem to be hitting them just behind the legs. I find that I only just clip the lungs and liver. Any tips to train the brain to aim forward, especially with chittle? When that happens, what are you doing with the meat?"
Yeah, great question, Finn, and thanks very much for your honesty as well, because I think this is a great learning curve for a lot of people. I've certainly been there in the early days where, everyone says, oh, there's this magic triangle just behind that front leg there in the crease, and you kind of go, what's this crease? And it didn't really click for me until I became a vet and sort of worked out exactly where the anatomy lies, and it's very different on all different species. For example, if a feral goat has just gone and drank 10 litres of water, her vitals are going to be pushed right up forward. Goats in particular generally have quite a large GIT tract, and it pushes things quite a bit far forward. And this can actually be said with the chittle specifically. They generally tend to be quite far forward and low compared to, other species. For example, like a sambar deer, that if you hit them behind the front leg there, even if it's tight behind the front leg, you're still taking out a good portion of the lungs just because of that lung field. So to keep it simple, the way I often hunt is I'll actually come up the front leg and use that, especially with a single pin sight. I'll use that as a bit of a gauge as to where I want to be on the animal. And again, I think, this is an awesome question, and we could touch on shot placement forever. We actually got a similar question from Shay Linky, or Link, via Instagram as well, and they asked, can you do a deep dive into shot placement, please? So I think this is going to be a future podcast episode as well. But it also, I think with your psyche here and, acknowledging the mental part of it, I think a lot of hunters, particularly when they haven't shot, not saying you haven't shot a lot of game, but I remember earlier days for me, you always got had a bit of this fear of hitting bone and hitting the front leg, whereas as my setup's changed, and this is coming back to the previous question about shooting solid 2 blades, cut on contact, having a good poundage, I've got no issues of punching through the scapula. You want to generally avoid the humerus, which is a bit lower where the elbow is and things like that, and come up a little bit higher. But I typically aim up that front leg, especially on a broadside animal. And as they take that step forward and move that front leg, because their shoulder effectively is covering their heart and lungs. So the second you go behind the scapula and behind the humerus there, you're getting behind where the heart and lungs should be. If you're shooting quartering away and aiming for the offside, that's when it comes back into play. But if you're shooting an animal broadside, especially if it's taken, if its legs are perfectly symmetrical, you're going to be almost going into that no man's land where you're hitting the back of the lungs, hitting the liver, which can be effective shots, but it's also very close and verging on those gastrointestinal or gut shots, as we call, which often requires a second shot and a animal that's wounded and sort of suffering a little bit. So again, with Chital in particular, I'll come up that front leg and you'll see there's often a really nice prominent dot about 1/3 of the way up the animal's body height. I'll then come across that and there's often a little tapering off white line that goes left to right along the body of the animal, in Chital deer particularly. So that's the height that I like to shoot at. And that if I shoot for that big prominent dot on the shoulder on a perfectly broadside animal, whether it's a stag or hind, that's pretty much a heart shot for me. If they drop, this is again speaking with Chital deer, because a lot of the time I am anticipating they're going to drop, even if it's at less than 20 meters with the bow. If they do drop, it plays into the lung shot. If they don't drop, you take out the top of the heart. That animal's not going far at all, and he's going to lead to a really quick and efficient kill.
I think with this, Finn, it's probably just trying to identify why you feel like you're aiming back off that front leg. So it could be a mental thing where you don't want to hit the bone, and that's why you're aiming slightly back. Or even it could be like, are you taking shots at animals that are moving and walking, and hence like they're moving from left to right? You're aiming, you're not sort of carrying your bow through, and you're sort of, then they're moving and you're sort of, shooting them slightly further back than what you'd like. Maybe stopping them if they are walking, or anticipating that you've got to like sort of be aiming slightly in front when you shoot, for example. But I think a couple of things. So what I would probably do is if you like, I would be looking at Brad Smith has done some incredible videos on, I think he put them up on the Cayuga YouTube, but also on his own personal Instagram about like animals and dissecting them, and the anatomy and everything like that of the front leg. So especially between like the humerus and also the scapula. So just check those videos out, because I think that will put a bit of peace of mind, and especially like if you break down some animals yourself and stuff, and just see where that leg structure works. So that's the first thing I do, just to get the structure in your mind, maybe put yourself at ease about hitting bone and that type of thing. And if most people shooting over 60 pound with a solid 2-blade broadhead and solid like decent arrow weight setup, like you're going to punch through most of these bones on a broadside shot anyway. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about the bone structures, but just so you know, and also just for knowing where you aim, like a lot of people aim off that back leg, but especially if you're aiming low off that off that front leg, don't aim off the back leg. If you're aiming low off the front leg, then you're like what Ayden said, there's that no man's land pocket where there's not really any lung fields. Like the lung fields are up back off the front leg and higher, like above the top half of the animal. Whereas if you're aiming like low in that bottom third and stuff, like really you're probably in the diaphragm, sort of maybe liver area. But watch these videos to understand the anatomy. And then whether you've got like horizontal pins that come out your bow, or whether you've got like a vertical. So Ayden talked about a vertical single pin, like a spot hog sight, whereas like the option archery pins, for example, they're all horizontal pins. So it might be better for you to have a vertical pin where you can like actually line up your sight straight with the leg in a broadside shot, to secure where you need to be shooting. Like if you're coming back off that leg, then you know you're going too far back. Another thing is there's some incredible 3D archery targets nowadays that really like highlight. I think the Terra Firma just brought out one with Brad Smith and Robbie Austin and a couple of other guys actually, where they put everything in the perfect spot, and so you can actually start practicing at home and putting the arrow where the heart is, and these guys have literally shot hundreds of animals between them, and you know that you're going to be shooting in the right spot. So just getting that mindset and that muscle memory. But that also leads into then, like, I would actually recommend you just go out, mate. And if you've got goats or pigs and stuff on your property, like, I would probably just go out in like a very low stressful environment and stuff, and probably just shoot some goats and shoot some pigs and stuff like that. And just try and really nail that shot sequence. Like, it might be a buck fever thing. So just trying to work through, like, go out there and actually just shoot some critters. Like, you'd probably be doing some good for the property owner. You can put some meat in the freezer, but also just for like you and the ethics of taking shots and stuff like that on maybe bigger game or things that you're a bit more lustful on. Just taking the time to perfectly work out where you need to be hitting these animals. And there's nothing like actually, emulating like a real environment. So going and actually getting some critters on the ground is probably going to do some wonders for your shot sequence.
What we'll do as well, Finn, for yourself and a lot of other listeners, and I will benefit to this, when this podcast drops the coming days afterwards, I'll make sure that I schedule a few posts with some images, and I'll have some images of chital deer, and I can do some hinds and stags on different shot angles, and just place a little red dot or something like that using like a Photoshop as to where we might be able to place that arrow, where we would be thinking with like a broadside and a quartering away shot, different sort of animals, just for you to sort of see where we're trying to shoot them. Because a lot of people would go, oh, I can't believe you're shooting it there. But when you shoot them, cut them open and go to eat the heart, but it's, cut in half, it speaks for itself, really. And then just to answer your second question, or second part of that question, when that happens, what are you doing with the meat? Now, obviously, we're trying to avoid hitting the guts or the gastrointestinal tract. Often, one, because it leads to spoilage, but two, if there's prolonged, time between that animal actually running away and dying, and you've got to do a second shot and things like that, even just the heat of that animal, stressing and things like that can have effects on the meat. So something like a tenderloin, which is within the rib cage there and in the abdominal cavity, I guess, is more likely to be contaminated or have a bit of like a heat effect to it, and be not edible potentially or redeemable. Whereas generally, I would say that the back legs and back straps, even potentially the front legs, if you're not hitting them with the shot, should be pretty salvageable. If there is ever any like little bit of grass contamination from like feed or something like that, I don't advise washing meat or anything like that, or wetting it or cooling, like wetting it to get rid of stuff normally. But in this instance, I would do that preferentially to get rid of any potential bacteria that's on that grass and get rid of all the grass matter. Otherwise, I normally just try and let stuff air dry in a nice, cool, shady spot. So, or ideally in a cool room. But that's where, before putting it in that place, like a cool room where you're going to let it hang, I would be washing it, drying it adequately, just to get all that sort of grass matter and material. And that goes the same for blood, hair, milk, anything like that, urine, dirt, whatever contaminants are on meat. It's always best to get that off before you sort of let it hang for a while. So I think the meat would actually be fine in most instances. If meat ever gets warmer or anything like that, because especially in North Queensland, where I'm assuming you're hunting these chital, it can get quite hot. Trying to get meat off the bone and off the ball joints and things can be advantageous as well. But thank you very much for your question, mate. We will touch on shot placement, meat retrieval, a few of these aspects in further podcasts. But best of luck with your chital hunting journey. The next question is our last question. Otherwise, we'll be going for too long and talking about too much stuff, because we're pretty keen to keep these FAQs coming in. But this one isn't specifically directed at any one person's question, but this seems to be a bit of a continual theme that pops up. We've been getting this a lot, as we said earlier in the podcast, at the Venture Rut Ready event, as well as the Flow State Expo, which we recently attended, where members of the crowd and people that have come through the booth have kind of said, you guys look pretty fit, you obviously love your hunting, very passionate about it. What are you guys doing to stay fit for hunting and fit for the rut in general? And I'll let James start off and tackle this one, because it's quite an interesting topic.
So I know for me personally, like I actually moved to Armidale for improved hunting access, which is obviously pretty diehard in the sense of moved to a town that literally knew no one in, with obviously my partner, But like I moved to Armidale because I said to her, hey, I want to be closer to red deer and fallow deer and, you know, good hunting areas. Knew that sort of Hunter Valley, like Northern Hunter, were pretty good. She picked Armidale and we moved to Armidale. So that's obviously like quite far on the end of the spectrum in terms of like, you know, there's not many people that are going to move like away from all their friends and family to an area to just get improved hunting grounds. But that's obviously why I did it. So, but yeah, like in terms of actual fitness and stuff, like because of that, then I'd go hunting now probably a day or two every week, which obviously in itself, and carrying a lot of the camera gear and stuff that we carry, you know, like our day packs probably weigh 15 kilos. We're covering a lot of country. We're doing it regularly. So in terms of that, like there's no substitute. Like the first answer to this question is there's no real substitute for hunting fitness like hunting. So if you're going hunting all the time, you know, you're probably going to be in reasonable shape. The next thing that I would actually recommend for if you only have like a limited amount of time to train and you want to keep in pretty good fitness for the mountains and stuff like that, like just say you train 4 days a week with weights and stuff like that anyway, what I would probably do, and this would be my biggest recommendation, is I would probably join a gym that has a Stairmaster, and I would make sure that the warm-up for every single one of my gym sessions, like I would rather cut my gym sessions from, you know, a 45-minute or an hour-long session at the gym to one that's fairly intense, and I would incorporate probably a 15-minute or 20-minute warm-up on the Stairmaster. And what I'd actually do is I would probably start by doing it with no weight and just do like try and aim for that 60 steps per minute rate and see how long you can last. It will grind you down and humble you quite quickly. But I'd jump on the Stairmaster to do 15 or 20 minutes, and I'd be trying to build that up till I could probably be settling out with like a 20 kilo weight on me when I was walking. Like this is sort of the stuff that we're doing for New Zealand and the US and stuff. We actually go heavier. We go up to like 30 in that. And we'll do that for like half an hour and try and do like over 100 floors in that time. But that's sort of the stuff that I recommend if you did want to really keep mountain fit, especially like if it's sort of flatland stuff, you're not probably really putting like a base level of fitness is probably going to be fine. I mean, to be honest, Ayden and I do more of just have a general fitness lifestyle where we both try and run a couple of times a week. As you would have heard, we both try and go to the gym a couple of times a week, which, you know, keeps us fairly fit on a base level, and then chuck in a couple of hunts here and there for me a week. And we don't really have much problems when it comes to fitness on the mountains. But yeah, definitely even when I do have that base level of fitness, like when we're about to go to the US this year, I'll actually go on the Stairmaster an additional 4 or 5 days a week for probably half an hour, do that 100 floors with a 20 or 30 kilo accumulated weight load on my back, just to make sure that when I get to the US, firstly, it's easier for hopefully the pack outs that we're going to do, but just from a point of view that like there is no doubt in my mind that I haven't done everything that I possibly can to be physically prepared for this hunt and what's going to be ahead. And so when I need to run up that mountain with my day, like all my pack and stuff on to get to a bugling elk, like you can go as fast as you can, because in those circumstances, minutes count for like hours, in the sense of, especially if it's like an arvo hunt or something like that. So, hunt as much as you can. In summary from me, hunt as much as you can. If you had to keep hunt ready throughout the year, and you didn't, you hunt, or where you hunt is a couple of hours away, just say, incorporate the Stairmaster is going to be the biggest one. And like I said, 60 steps per minute is what you're aiming for. Start increasing the weight that you can carry, but start off at just like your body weight. And I'd be doing that as the warm up for your weight session. I would rather be trying to do that than, get massive biceps personally, with, how, like, especially as we get older, like, I know it probably sounds a bit silly, but I don't care that much what I look like now. And, like if I can bench 120 kilos or whatever, like I'd rather just be overall fit for sort of longevity and everything like that and be fit for the mountains. So I'd rather sacrifice time under a bench than time, getting up a hill for sort of thing. So the Stairmaster is going to be the best thing if you live in like some of these big cities and can't get out all the time. And then, just keeping for us is just a general base level of fitness. So like doing sort of high intensity sessions when we're at the gym too, we try not to, like, knowing how we both train, like we're both sort of like 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off, like the HIIT sort of style, or, fairly intense where it's like, you might be doing chest as the main workout, but then you walk over and you might just do some light leg stuff, like some light leg press or light squat as like a superset sort of thing, where like chest or back is the main thing, or, you know, same thing, you might be doing legs, but then you might do some light shoulder stuff or some light arm stuff in between, and just try and really maximize. Like I see people sitting at the gym for 2 hours where they're just on their phone scrolling, and I'll go in there for half an hour, smash it out and leave, and then go for a run. So just trying to maximize your time in there, maximize your outputs, and yeah, just keep that base level of fitness.
Yeah, I don't really have anything further to add to that. I think general interval stuff is really, really good, and just doing hard things more often, whether it's trail running, hiking, you know, rucking, chucking weight in your pack if you can't access a stair machine, and just going up the mountains, doing some hikes. I think getting a hunting buddy or a mate and just keeping someone accountable, because it's quite easy. It's actually a little bit disappointing in humans in general that, you know, I will sleep in and I won't go to gym and I'll be late to that event, and, you know, oh no, I'll miss training today. But the second, you know, James messages me and says, hey mate, we're getting up at 5 tomorrow to go for a run, it's like, yep, no worries. And you need that motivation from another person. And I think, yeah, if that's the case, then good, identify it until you build the really good habits. And if it takes you, you know, requiring a mate to sort of kickstart you and get you fit, then that's awesome. Just be accountable, especially when it does come to, you know, if you've identified that hunting is your passion and you want to get fitter in general and have, you know, a healthier lifestyle and stuff, then even little things like assault bikes, rowing before a workout, doing all these things can really be like a good avenue to, one, just raising your heartbeat, because I think hunting is more of a marathon type pursuit where you're not, you know, deadlifting some deadfall, and then that's it. You get to wait for 10 minutes and then do it again, and then wait for 10 minutes and do it again. Like hunting is like you climb the deadfall, you go under a tree, you fall over a log, you go down the creek, and you're doing that for hours and hours and hours and hours with 20 kilos on your backpack. So it's those sustained yet repeatable efforts over a long, long period of time. So the better you can work with your heart rate up at a certain level and almost have a bit of mobility and a bit of endurance and a bit of strength, like you really do have to be, you know, we hear this hybrid athlete a lot, but hunters are incredibly, you know, when you're doing it in certain environments, and if you are really hunting hard, like you do have to be very, very physically and mentally fit. So that's probably my contribution. I'll round that out there for myself.
I think just adding another thing in, like knowing the demographic of the people that listen to our podcast and watch our videos and stuff like that and follow us on Instagram, like generally speaking, it's a male between the ages of 20 to 35. So like, you know, doing this sort of thing is like, we talk about like the stuff on the assault bike and, you know, the stuff on the, you know, the Stairmaster and going to the gym and all this stuff. But I mean, like there are guys out there that are probably 50 and 60 and stuff like that, like more closer to dad too, where, you know, you might be starting to get a bit long in the tooth and might have a little bit of a beer gut as well. But it's like, if you don't do any level of base fitness, like my recommendation for you guys would be like, just put a pair of sneakers on with your partner or your wife or you know, whatever, or a mate, and just go for a walk every morning around the block for half an hour. Like, I mean, when it comes to the rut, like just having your body be prepared for that load of like you, like I can't think of how many times we've taken people chittle hunting, and they're generally, you know, older men, where like just standing up for hours on end, glassing for chittle deer. Like we might only walk 4Ks in 8 hours, but people struggle to just even be able to do that because they're not used to just standing up on their feet all the time. So that's where like just getting your knees and back and stuff used to you being active and walking around again is probably some of the first steps before you then go and jump on a Stairmaster and chuck 20 kilos on yourself. You probably break yourself. So just like we always talk about moving the needle in the right direction, even in the smallest increments that you can. So like for some of these other guys where, or, you know, even if you haven't done that much fitness and stuff, like, you know, go with your wife or go with your kids or go with a mate or something like that. And just go for a walk for half an hour is going to be the start. And then, I mean, like whether you incorporate a little run here and there, or whether you incorporate, you know, going to the gym as well, like it's, you know, like it's just going to be anything really. Like if you do nothing, doing anything is going to be better than what you're currently doing. So, and I mean, we could probably tackle this. It wasn't really part of the question, but even leading then into diet, like, you know, like if you're a bigger fella, well, you're probably going to get more out of not putting stuff in your mouth than you are going to be going to the gym, because I mean, it's a lot easier not to have 6 beers a night than it is to go and run 6 kilometers to burn off those beers. So like just thinking about it from that point of view, like if you want to get in better shape for the rut, or, you know, want to get better shape for just hunting in general, sometimes it's the things that you're not putting in your mouth and adding in exercise that's going to get you better results quicker. And it just takes a bit of discipline there, whether it is going and exercising or whether it is, you know, just eating the best, you know, foods that you can for yourself. So just keep that in mind too, because like obviously Ayden and I are fairly intense in all things in our life, I feel like sometimes when we're talking. But yeah, just for some of the population, like just doing something and sort of probably having a bit more of structure and minding what you're putting in your mouth may be a lot more beneficial than, you know, doing some of the things we discussed earlier in this question.
Being so passionate about food and cooking, we have teamed up with Camp Chef. With portable cookware for wherever your travels take you, Camp Chef provides a better way to cook food. Whether in the backyard or the backcountry, shop pellet grills, their cast iron range, or portable cooking systems today. We personally love their large 12-inch diameter skillets and camp ovens for cooking over the coals. Alrighty, and thank you guys. It's sort of got to that time of the podcast now where we've answered a few listener questions, which has been really great. As always, we appreciate everyone's contributions. I just wanted to say a massive special thank you to all of you guys, particularly our viewers over on YouTube who have tuned into our Fallow Frenzy YouTube series over the last 5 weeks. That film series has sort of wrapped up now, just in time for us to actually head out into the bush and hopefully make some new memories this Fallow Deer Rut. For anyone that's wanting to watch the series as a full-length film, we've actually launched this coming Wednesday an uninterrupted film. It goes for about an hour and 10 minutes. That's going to be popping up on our YouTube channel featuring all 5 parts. That's just a bit of a bonus episode. If you've already seen the 5 parts, then no need to watch it. But if you do want to sit down with the kids, watch it as a bit of a full cinematic film, almost like a movie, then that's going to be one for you. Up next, the next big YouTube release for us is going to be on the 26th of March. Make sure you drop that in your calendars. We're going to be releasing our 2025 Northern Territory highlight reel. If you came to the Float State Outdoors Expo, you would have seen it playing as a bit of a sneak peek at our booth where we had the Spotted Safaris and Twin Elements booth, and we're meeting all you incredible people. We're actually going to be using this short film to launch our 20,000 subscriber YouTube giveaway. So we're really, really excited about that. You may have heard us allude to it in previous weeks of the podcast. And as part of this YouTube giveaway, we've actually assembled an epic prize bundle for one lucky winner. Now, to enter, you must be subscribed to the Twin Elements YouTube channel. So make sure you go directly over there and subscribe if you haven't already. Some of the footage that we're going to be releasing over the coming months is going to be pretty epic, as you will see in this highlight reel, which we're dropping on the 26th of March. Just to repeat that again, what you have to do is like that specific video, and then can you please comment? And it has to be in 25 words or less. Essentially, we want you to describe your dream hunt. So we want to know the species that you want to be hunting and the rough geographical location that you would like to go and visit for your adventure, and basically letting us know this dream hunt and what place you'll be using all this gear that you win in the prize package. So, for example, if it's a bull moose in Alaska, a tahr in New Zealand, the South Island of New Zealand, or a bangtang bull in Australia's Coburg Peninsula, something as simple as that. You can add in a little bit more detail, say if you want to do it with your old man or your wife and kids, whatever it may be, your hunting buddy. We want to hear it all. We want to hear, all these people's dream hunts. And hopefully you are the lucky winner. We're going to select that when we hit 20,000 YouTube subscribers. The terms and conditions of this is that, unfortunately, it is restricted for Australia and New Zealand residents only, but that is going to be primarily our YouTube subscribers, as we've seen like the demographics of who sort of supports us. So please go over 26th of March, which is coming up pretty quickly. Get excited for that highlight reel. There'll be plenty of information dropping on our socials over the coming weeks to keep you guys in the loop and remind you of this. It's not like it's going to just hit 20,000 subscribers either, so I'm assuming there will be a couple of weeks, hopefully, until we give away that prize. So plenty of time for you to enter your information, comment, like, subscribe, all the normal stuff on the Twin Elements YouTube channel. We really appreciate your support over there, as always.
The next video series that you'll be seeing on our YouTube channel, which we're just chopping up mad in the editing room at the moment, is the Against All Odds film. So what we're doing at the moment is putting it into more of a vlog format. As you can imagine, and we've sort of touched on previously, like Ayden and I spent 20 days out there. We experienced some incredible running activities, some magnificent bulls in the US, and what we've done is like we cut that down to almost like a highlight reel in the first one, where it was like 45 hours of footage cut down to 36 or 38 minutes from memory. So what we're doing is going back, and we're actually going to do like a narrated sort of version of it, which will show you guys sort of more of our emotions and what was going through our head at the time when we were going, on the hunt, and when we were experiencing what we were experiencing. So we hope that you guys really like that. So that will be out on the YouTube channel shortly, probably after the rut, to be honest, just because we'll be hunting and filming like mad through March and April, which sort of limits editing time, but we'll be out next, and then we'll be jumping into some epic NT action that you'll see in this highlight reel. So there's plenty to come out on the Twin Elements YouTube channel. So to be in the draw, like Ayden said, make sure you're subscribed there. But also there's just going to be some insane action coming out there. So make sure you're staying up to date. But what we've also done is we've just finalized our Twin Elements website, which one of the major features on that is we're now selling prints. So we've had a lot of messages in the history of Twin Elements with people asking to buy our prints and photos and stuff like that. So what we've done is we've edited up our top 40 favorite photos in the history of our hunting, I guess, and also just photography. And we've made them available to you guys. So if you want to jump on, please support us here at Twin Elements by buying a print. To be honest, like the quality of the photos and everything, and then what we've captured in some of these photos is like very unique, very artistic. They'd make great presents for a loved one or a partner or someone that loves the outdoors. So if you're stuck for an idea of what to get someone, jump online, buy a print, get it framed up. Like I know if I received any of the prints that we've got on there, I'd personally love them. It makes great presents. Or even if you just want to deck out your own, man cave or your own office or something like that with some pretty cool prints. We've got stuff from the US, we've got stuff from like the NT, pigs, birds, all different stuff. So there's something in there for everyone. So jump on the Twin Elements website and check it out. I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been sending in a heap of FAQs. We couldn't actually get through all of them in one podcast, so we'll definitely be doing a lot more of this and tackling a lot more FAQs in the podcast to come. We've got plenty of topics coming up in terms of, we might do another one on calling tactics. I think just because we have had still so many questions with calling in red deer and running rut questions, and we just want to make sure that you guys are as comfortable as possible leading into the rut, and hopefully share some of those tips and tactics that are going to increase the chance of you being successful. Thank you everyone for subscribing and reviewing and rating the podcast, and just the support that we've had around this channel. Obviously Ayden and I are really putting a lot of time and effort into it this year, trying to pump out the content for you guys, whether it be on social media or whether it be on our YouTube channel or whether it be on through this podcast. So the amount of support that we've got is really, really appreciated, and the feedback that we're getting, people sharing it with friends and stuff like that, everyone's just raving and loving it. So thank you so much guys for the support. We're just going to keep on trucking on, keep on getting everything rolling out to you guys. So thank you for the support, and we'll see you next time on the Twin Elements podcast.
Have a good rut and raw, and please send us in any photos of your successful trips or unsuccessful trips. We want to see you guys hunting and implementing all these tips and tactics. Cheers.